Welcome back to the Krown Crypto channel. It is a nice little dump-ola on this Friday. We are all once poor again, and this video is being recorded on a current live stream. So if you want to join in the future, it is typically on Fridays in the morning, about 9 a.m. Eastern Europe. Yeah, Eastern Europe time is what I'm trying to say. Anyways, first things first, I want to follow up on yesterday's sort of medium/short-term analysis. We were looking at first, momentum on basically all of the higher-term timeframes, and the lower-term timeframes were lining up for a continuation of the downside move. We saw officially the break of about 28.4 intraday there, which initiated the next sort of areas of interest based off the HPDR at around mid-27, 27.5. There was a very short-term bounce there. I think more evidently on the hourly. Let me just pull it up right here. Yeah, indeed, a little bit of an attempt for a bounce. But then obviously that was going to not always, but very likely lead into a continuation of that dump-ola party, looking for a closure somewhere around 26.7 to 26.9. It looks like the daily closing price was, I was asleep by the way during all of this, was 26.6. So, pretty close right there. A little bit lower, but that's okay. Obviously, wicks much further to the downside in this case, and really a big differential between all major exchanges, actually. When we look at the index, Bitcoin traded to a low price of about 25.5 or so. If we look at Bybit, for example, we can see that wicked all the way down here to 23.5, or almost 23.5 in this case. Pretty fucking nasty, to be quite frank with you. Anyways, for right now, has Bitcoin found a little bit of a short-term low? Very likely yes, and today probably, if I had to guess, is going to be a bit of a consolidation day. Looking at the range to the upside about 27 versus the downside at about 25.7 or so. As long as Bitcoin's kind of between there, can't really expect anything super major. Now I do want to, just as yesterday, go over a sort of situation that if met would imply that we're going to see a bear trap. Obviously, I do think that this is at this point a little bit of a lower probability, just personally speaking. But if this were to be met, over the next few days, then that would be indicative that, hey, this was a nice trap move, and we could probably look for Bitcoin to grind sideways and up, but 27,500 would be the area of interest on a daily closing basis. Bitcoin can reclaim that starts to look pretty good for at least a short-term low, and Bitcoin to try another short-term upside move, and then the next area of interest above there would be yesterday's breakdown point at about 28.4, again on a closing basis. Anyways, I want to move through this now, and we can get into, I do want to rephrase that actually that last part and say basically that is to suggest that as long as Bitcoin is below 27,500, still bearish overall, and consolidations here, likely do lead towards continuation. Anyways, moving through it now, I do want to reference one of our long-term charts. That would be the volatility versus stochastic momentum chart. We didn't speak about it yesterday. At least I don't remember speaking about it yesterday. But early this week we spoke about it, and obviously the weeks prior we've been speaking about it as well. And in this case, we have been looking for volatility expansion off of extreme lows on the 2-day time frame, which it looks like this is it. This is it. Getting even higher than what we did see on that short-term move in August, early August, that is. So in this case, that would suggest that the 2-day momentum pivot, as long as it remains to the downside, does imply that would be more immediate pressure to the downside for continuation. And in today's pivot is going to be 26,700. Now you will likely remember from yesterday that pivot was much higher, and technically speaking, it did obviously it closed like well below it. It's about 28.8, I believe, if I can remember properly. But I believe it was 28.8. So it's actually moved down quite significantly here. But of course, as long as Bitcoin is below it, that still means that pressure is on, and we can continue to look at these statistics over here as relevant for the 2-day volatility versus stochastic momentum setups, which over the full course of Bitcoin's history, which there's been 19 prior iterations, 16 have worked out in that fashion to the downside. Taken about 2 weeks on average for it to play out, and the average return was about 25% with a standard deviation of 8. So going back into it, let me just make sure, where am I? Yes, there we go. I take these measurements from the last local high in this case, and if it does go for the average, that would put Bitcoin significantly lower. So I think that's kind of like worst case scenario is maybe Bitcoin somewhere down around 22.5, 21.5, something like that would kind of make sense. Probably also going to collide with a CME gap coming in from earlier this year as well. And then of course, looking at the timing of this, that would suggest, on average, we'd actually be looking we'd be looking into like next week for that for that move to continue, if it is going to continue. Again, that would be the average move. Obviously, if we're looking at this from the first standard deviation, the lower side of that would be a lot closer to current price action. In fact, I think we're pretty damn close there already. In fact, yeah, 16% versus 18, or sorry, almost 17% versus 18%. So that would suggest that if this is going to be one of those more shallow moves, and we basically don't see it continue by next week, that would be a good indication that, hey, that setup is done. It fired off, and it was done almost as soon as it fired off, which is kind of fucking crazy. But sometimes that's just the way that it works, and fair enough. That's just part of the game. Anyways, moving on through here, I do want to get into something that is a bit more unique, and I think in hindsight does offer up a little bit more a little bit more of a nuanced interpretation. But actually, before we get into that, I just want to show that, the CME gap that I'm referencing this is the wrong chart. Let me go to Bitcoin. Why does it look like shit? No, but that's because I'm looking at Doggy Coin. I'm referencing this gap over here. That Bitcoin put in March of this year on one of those, I forget, it was like a bank failing or some shit like that. But that would be your kind of like mid to low $21,000 territory, basically. So I think that's probably worst case scenario in this case. Anyway, so the last thing that I want to get to right here is, of course, this chart. So this is a long-term chart that we were looking at on the macro videos, typically, of Bitcoin's timing before the halving, and sort of the interplay that we see with typically a pretty sizable rally before the halving, followed by a pretty nasty dump before the halving as well. And in this case, we've seen it 3 prior times. Obviously, there's been 3 prior cycles, and the main components that I want to reference here is I think this most recent one is the most obvious, but basically long term, there is, after Bitcoin goes on its parabolic blow off high or tops, it does put in these long-term downtrends, which then typically breaks about a year before the halving itself. Again, 364 days, 378 days, and 406 days, and in this case 448 days. So it is getting a little bit longer over time, but that relationship does seem to have some carryover there. Anyways, more to the point is that this first move right here we have measured on all of these prior moves. This first one right here I'm referencing, where Bitcoin breaks out about 4,000 all the way up to about 14,000 bucks, and then breaks down after that. So I measured both the days that it took to reach that first high, the percentage that it gained, and then also after that, the amount of days it took to reach that next low, plus the percentage lost. And that's this information. If I can pull it up over here, where's my damn shit? Probably in the toilet. There we go. All right. So as far as the first rally goes, typically took about 100 days on average, with the longest one taking about 133 days. And what do you know, on this current one that we did see, from the actual long-term breakout to where Bitcoin did top out at was actually 133, or sorry, it's going to be 140 days. 140 days. I should just add one more on top of there, but yeah, 140 days. So very much in alignment with that as far as timing goes, is what we expect on that first major high. And as far as like percentage gained, definitely not, definitely not comparable to the last ones that we did see. This was only a 50% move to the upside compared to all these past ones, which were multiple hundreds of percent. So I would say that is going to play into probably the long-term theory that I hold, and I'm sure many other people hold as well. It's like, it's not anything super crazy, but basically it is that over time we expect the returns for Bitcoin to be diminished over time. Just as more people get involved in this asset, the market cap grows. Naturally speaking, you're probably not going to be getting thousands and thousands of percents gained on the major bull markets, and likewise, you're probably not going to see as nasty of downside movements as well. Instead of 70 or 80% retracements, you might see 50 or 60, something like that. Anyways, after that high was met, it did take on average about 90 days, so 3 months from that high, to reach the next major low. And there was an average actually of about 40% loss. Now, do keep in mind that, we only have 3 prior iterations, but, they do kind of rhyme with each other. So I would expect somewhere around there, probably a little bit less on the lesser side. So again, this kind of plays into my long-term worst case scenario idea. But, if Bitcoin were to reach back down to 21.5 or 22.5, that would put it in the 30% range. And of course, if we were to look at this from a timing perspective, well, what does 90 days from the current high look like? That would put a potential low somewhere around late September, early October. So I think that that's still kind of like worst case scenario here. I still remain with my long-term, with my long-term view that the lows are in for Bitcoin. I still remain with my long-term views that Bitcoin very unlikely even goes below $20,000 again. And more importantly, what makes me a little bit more confident of that is just the amount of incessant like calls on Twitter that I saw this morning for 15,000, 12,000. I even saw 6,000. Don't get me wrong, like everything has a probability, right? But I think that that's still very, very low. And it certainly would not be my first target based off of, this move right here. It's just, who made a great post about this? Kevin fucking Svensson. He's amazing, by the way, as I stutter through my words. But Kevin Svensson on Twitter, he put it just perfectly. He marked off all of these lows over here. Like this first low here, it's like bearish, or, in like a bearish voice. Bitcoin going to 10,000. I'm telling you right now. Then he marks off this low over here, and he says, Silvergate crash. Bitcoin going to 10,000. Told you so. It's like these are much higher lows. Same thing over here, off of whatever news this was. And then, of course, the same thing right here as well. I think that that's very, very premature, obviously, to be calling for that sort of low things. But it's very interesting that, all of these have been massively higher lows, and people just seem to it's almost like you get more bearish. I mean, are you more bearish if you're bearish here than if you are right here? I would say you're more bearish. Yeah, I'd actually say that you are more bearish in that case. It doesn't really make sense. Anyways, okay, cool. All right. So I think that does it for today's analysis. We can actually go through the lower term time frame stochastic momentum here. I forgot to do that. Again, just kind of keeping in mind this current range. Actually, in fact, on Bybit, if we go down to the 4-hour, I'm imagining that we're probably going to see between about 26, just below 26 to the downside, and I'd still be looking at 27.5 to the upside. So let's go see what stochastic momentum is currently positioned at. Obviously, we already looked at the 2-day, and the 2-day is going to be down. The daily is going to continue, is what I'm trying to say, with downside momentum below 28,150. 12-hour time frame is going to be also showing downside pressure below 27.5. 6-hour time frame getting really, really critical right here, alongside what do seem to be extremes on volatility at 26.6. 4-hour time frame is going to be showing pretty much the same thing here, 26.2 in this case, and hourly is going to be showing actually upside above 26.5, which Bitcoin's trading a little bit above right now. So, intraday here, I probably would be looking for a bounce. Does Bitcoin pop back up and fill the CME gap? Definitely possible. It'll be something to be aware of, at least at some point. I don't necessarily know if that's if we'll see that hit today. But again, the main point I would have is that if we are going to see something resembling a major bear trap, I'd want to see higher term time frame closures above 27.5. That would be my major sort of red flag for, hey, this is a trap move, kind of. I mean, you can't really trap people in like a almost 20% downside move, but you know what I mean, right? So yeah, I think I'll leave it right there. Short term, probably a bit of sideways, probably an attempt for a bounce. Today's, if I had to guess, today's probably gonna be more or less sideways within its current range, and then we find out next week if this dump really is real. If it's not, if we don't see movements by next week, that's at the point where, hey, I would be looking for this one to grind sideways and out, and that's gonna become a higher probability. So that is where I'll leave things right there, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.